Okay, so now that we know basics of constructor, we know constructor chaining. Let's also look at some concepts around default and parameterized constructor with the help of, or rather when inheritance is involved, how does it actually work? Okay, so I will go ahead and constructor concept. I'll go to this file here. Okay, so a little while back, we looked at this concept of constructor chaining, right? Now, I told you that when you create a child, the control comes here, right? And when it sees that there is an extends keyword, it goes to parent, and therefore the output is parent and child, right? So if you right click and run this, it shows output as parent and then child, right? But actually, how does it happen? Is that uh, let me what happens? Okay, when you run this piece of code, it comes here. What happens in the code internally? Java will insert a super keyword here, super with a bracket. Okay, now since it inserts a super with a bracket, what is the use of super? It calls the corresponding constructor in the super class, which is a parent, right? So here when you call child came here. This, if you add this line or you don't add this line, this is all, this is there or generated for you by the compiler, and because of this line it gets, or it calls the constructor in the parent class, right? So this is the reason why it calls the superclass constructor. Now let's make some changes around here. Okay, so I'm calling a default constructor from here, right? And but here I have a parameterized constructor int a. So this will give an error. And why? Because from the child constructor I'm saying super or a default constructor without argument. So it is looking for a default constructor, but it does not find it, and therefore it can't compile. So I, for the same reason I just explained some time back, I have to create a constructor here, right? Open and close. I have to create a default constructor also. Why? Because if there is a parameterized constructor and I am calling a default constructor, then I have to create one for the reason I just explained in the previous discussion, right? Okay, so as I have just explained that when you, whether you add this keyword super or you do not add it, it is inserted for you by the compiler, right? And it in turn calls or look expects a default constructor in the super class. So I have to have this, otherwise the code will not compile. But what if I pass 10? If I pass 10 here, which is an integer, it will call this. In that case I don't need to have this. Why? Because the default constructor is not getting called at all, and because it is not getting called, therefore it will not give compile time error. So this is a default constructor, right? Let's say I do make it as a parameterized constructor int a, and I pass 100 here. So when this line is executed, it will call the method at 12, right? And even this one also inserts a default super only. It does not add, compiler when it adds a line at line like line number 13, it always does it for the default constructor only. Just because this is now parameterized does not mean that it will be parameterized. It always uh, adds a line super with no argument, meaning that it will look always for a default constructor until you don't explicitly put here 10, right? If you put super with argument or super without argument, in that case compiler will not add it. If it is not there, let's say if you don't add this, then it will always add super with no argument there, right? And if there is super with no argument, then it will expect a default constructor here, right? So that is how it basically works. Whether you call from the child a parameterized or non-parameterized, it always adds a super with empty bracket, meaning that it will look for a default constructor in the parent class.